All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Shaykh Yahya Al-Baltimoori, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today at Masjid al-Haq. Discussing matters that are on the hearts and minds of a lot of people in our community. This is our first embarking on this journey of learning and knowledge from people from our community and gaining understanding from those who have studied and learned. I just want to extend my appreciation for having you take the time out of your day after you just gave a class.
Well, brother, let me tell you, I'm pleased and I'm happy to be here. Talking about Islam is never a burden for me. I mean, this is something that I enjoy. All the years when I was studying and putting in all those hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of studying, it never felt like work.
Wow.
It's something I truly enjoy. That doesn't mean it was easy, but it meant that I don't have any problem doing it. This is something I get joy from it. You know how there's some people who really like talking. You sit down in a group of people and they talk and they get energized by it. These people, they're called extroverts. And you have some people, if you ask them to talk, it drains them.
Wow.
For me, if the subject is Islam, I get energized by it.
Right.
Because I truly enjoy it, mashallah.
Mashallah, mashallah. I would say the same for myself, except for I enjoy listening to those with knowledge. I'm just I would consider myself just a everyday man out here that picks up knowledge from time to time when I can and do my best to apply it. But I've had the opportunity to have one-off conversations with you about the importance of knowledge, the importance of even the everyday man, maybe to someone who's not wanting to become an alim or a sheikh, as we talked about earlier, but just the importance of knowledge just to their everyday life. So I just was wanted you to maybe expound upon that for the audience to kind of talk about that importance.
Well, absolutely. I think every Muslim would rather be learning knowledge than teaching knowledge. Okay, just because the knowledge itself is sweet. And by teaching it, you might, in the course of reviewing it, you might grow stronger. You might understand it better or remember it more deeply. So there's lots of benefits to teaching. But in the end, learning something new will give you more knowledge. It will expand your knowledge. And it's certainly sweeter than teaching. Right. So I definitely understand why you'd rather listen. And this is actually a good attribute of the Muslim. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in a hadith narrated by At-Tirmidhi, لن يشبع المؤمن من خير يسمع حتى يكون منتهاه الجنة. He said the perfect believer, he never feels satisfied with the good he has heard, meaning like knowledge of the religion. He says until he reaches his end in paradise.
SubhanAllah.
So a Muslim never feels like he knows enough. He always wants to learn more, all the way until he dies. Right. And the biggest scholars this ummah has ever seen, people like Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmed, these scholars, they continued seeking knowledge clear all the way to the end, even though their level of knowledge is barely comprehensible to the likes of me. So if they're still looking for more, then what about us?
Right. Right. So, I think there's, a lot of us find ourselves, maybe we're born Muslim, right? And we picked up things from our parents. And then some of us converted to Islam, right? And we picked up what we thought were the basics to be able to pray and wudu. But then we find ourselves in a different community, finding that people are doing things differently than the way that we've been taught. And sometimes it's confusing for us. You hear the words like madhab, you hear words like schools of thought, right? And I think for sometimes people who are just starting to, I guess, even if you're born Muslim, maybe discover Islam for yourself, right? Not just following your parents, and people who have converted to Islam and they come across as they get a little confused. So just kind of wanted to know how people should approach this topic, or, even the importance of schools of thought or madhab if you see it that way.
Sure. That's kind of a big question, so I don't know where I'm going to begin with my answer. But I suppose I'll start with a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, "Innama al-ilmu bit-ta'allum." It means knowledge can only be gained from a teacher. Okay, so kind of the first answer to that is that no one should be trying to teach themselves this deen. Islam cannot be learned by reading books. Islam cannot be learned by going to websites. Islam cannot be learned through YouTube videos. You have to go to a teacher according to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay? And then I'm going to mention another hadith. This one is not a hadith of the Prophet. It's a hadith of one of the top scholars of the Tabi'een. His name was Muhammad ibn Sirin. He said, "Inna hadha al-ilma deen, fanzuru amman ta'khuduna deenakum." He said, truly, this knowledge is part of our religion. So look carefully who you get your religion from. You know, what he means by that is don't just go to any teacher. See, in his day, nobody was learning from books. Everyone knew to go to teachers. Like right now, we're even in the worst state. But don't just go to any teacher. This is the tabi'een we're talking about. Go to the teacher and find out who his teacher was. You understand? And in this way, we developed something that's called a sanad, a chain of transmission. Those tabi'een who were teaching, it was like, you know, some of the tabi'een who were teaching were taught by the Sahaba. And therefore, you can trust what they're saying because their teachers were trustworthy. Some of the tabi'een were not taught by the Sahaba, and they were making stuff up. Some of them were hypocrites, you know, in the time of the tabi'een, I mean, some of them were hypocrites. So you don't want to just take from anybody. Okay, you want to make sure that your teacher is trustworthy and knowledgeable, and that he learned from a teacher that's trustworthy and knowledgeable, who learned from a teacher that's trustworthy and knowledgeable, with chains that go back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
So that chain of transmission is very important. I hear sometimes in discussions people may be asked, you know, new Muslims they may be asked from their family, like, okay, well, how do you know this is true? Like, how do you know this hadith is true? You know, where does it come from? And I think maybe the chain of transmission, sounds like the chain of transmission is really critical to validating that information.
The chain of transmission is critical for every aspect of Islam, not just hadith. Right. And this is what I was getting at when you asked about the madhabs, because in reality, the only source nowadays of chains is in these four madhabs. Okay, all of the chains go through these madhabs. So if there's a person who's not following a madhab, then I know right away whatever knowledge he has, he didn't get it through a chain that goes back to the Prophet. Because the only chains that exist going back to the Prophet come through these madhabs. You know? So right away I know this person is already off the path. He's not learning from a teacher as the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam commanded. Or if he is learning from a teacher, he didn't investigate to see whether the teacher had chains.
Right, right. I know, speaking just from personal experience, I might have heard something as a child, you know, just picking it up in the masjid, and then, you know, go to actually look for that hadith, and it's not there, or it has a weak transmission. And so, like, when it comes to, I guess, madhabs or following a particular madhab, it sounds like you don't have to. Do you have to still worry about that problem, or is it because you're maybe sitting with a teacher, or you're sitting with someone that it's a little bit more avoided?
So it's the top level scholars who determine which hadith are strong and which hadith are weak.
Okay.
Okay. So the madhabs are built entirely on strong hadith.
Right.
Okay. There's no madhab that's following or teaching weak hadith. However, there might be disagreement among them about whether a hadith is weak or strong.
Right.
Okay. So there are cases where one madhab teaches something based on a hadith, and according to the methodology of that madhab, this hadith is strong. Some other madhab does not follow that hadith because the methodology that madhab is based on would declare that same hadith to be weak. Okay, because the madhabs have different standards in terms of determining what's strong and what's weak.
Right.
Okay.
Interesting.
So the strength and weakness of a hadith is not something that's independent of the madhabs. The strength and weakness of the hadith comes from the madhabs themselves.
Right. So we established that madhabs are really important to not just if you want to become a sheikh or an alim, but just really to the everyday person to ensure that what they're doing comes from a valid source, right? And then you spoke a little bit earlier about how we need to find teachers or valid sources for information, even to receive that information, right? Not just go to a book, because you could get confused if you're not well versed in even to how to interpret that information. So how should someone pursue finding a teacher, or like how do you know when you found that teacher, or how do you go about that process?
For most people, it's going to be as simple as finding someone who's willing to teach you, asking him who his teacher was. Like, where did you study? Okay, nowadays, big scholars are not very common here in the United States, but there are, alhamdulillah, in most large cities, a number of people who at least went overseas and studied with some of the big sheikhs, right? So the person ought to be able to name someone that you would recognize or could at least find out about as his sheikh. And he can name what school he went to. Very often, just knowing the school is enough, because some of these schools, it's known that the faculty at those schools are legitimate, So for most people, that would be really all that's necessary. But if you want to be extra careful, you can ask about the specific teachers.
Okay. So let's say that you come to the masjid, you take your shahada, I guess you should, at what point do you think someone should start being directed to a teacher, or start looking for that at themselves right away, or should they try to get the basics?
Immediately.
Yeah, immediately.
Meaning when the person says the shahada, you congratulate him and say, okay, there's stuff you need to learn. Now he doesn't have to dive into the deep end right away, but those basics, like what are the basics of what we believe?
Yeah.
How do you perform a most simple type of salat? If Ramadan is close, how do you fast? These very basic things, you teach them right away. You don't delay.
Right. Because
the truth of the matter is, in most cases, when that person said his shahada, it was salat time. And he has a salat to perform right then before the salat time goes out.
Right.
So you can't delay it. You got to start teaching them right away.
Yeah, start teaching them right away. Yeah.
And when you're teaching him, if you are a legitimate teacher, then you acquired your knowledge through one of the madhabs. And you're going to pass on what you were taught.
Right.
Because it's very important in this deen that we pass on the deen without changing anything. You don't want to add to it. You don't want to take away from it. You don't want to flip, swap things in and out. You need to pass it on just the way it was passed to you.
Right.
Okay? And that also can be a source of contention. I've had people come to me and ask me to teach them a particular book. They had an interest in this book. Say, hey, can you teach me this book? Yeah. And I say to them, I haven't studied that book. And then they say, yeah, but can you teach it? I'm just like, why would you even ask that? Soon as I've told you I haven't studied that book, what that means is it didn't reach me through a sahih chain. Right. So why would you even ask me to teach it if I don't have a chain for that book?
That's actually very interesting that you mentioned that, right? Because I think for a lot of people, they see, the way that we come up in today's society, and even before now, people would say, if you want to learn something, go to the library, pick up a book, study it, right? You go to college, the professor may give you a lecture, but a lot of things you might pick up from a book, right? We are encouraged to read, even though a lot of people don't read in our society. We're encouraged to read. Why is that different when it comes to understanding and learning your religion?
The truth is, it's not different, but there's stages. Okay. Would you tell a first grader to go, here, read this book on genetics? It's going to be over his head. Right. He's not going to get it. Right. So for several years, you're going to teach him science from a teacher to the child at a level that he can understand. But if he keeps with it, he will reach a point where he's able to do research on his own and he will understand what he's reading. The same is true in Islam. There's a stage after which you can do research and you can read books and learn from books. But that stage takes years to reach, years of study to reach. Just like in our regular schools here, you learn math for your entire K through 12 education before you go to college. You know? Took 12 years just to get to that level of math, which, let's be honest, is not even a particularly high level. You know? In high school, I mean, some of us don't even reach calculus. Calculus is like 500-year-old math.
Yeah.
You know? That geometry that we learned in high school, that's like 2,000 years old. That's not cutting edge.
Right.
You know? But it takes us a number of years to reach a point that humanity was at like many centuries or even millennia ago.
Yeah.
Same thing with Islam. You need to study from a teacher who can make sure you understand it correctly, who can correct the errors that are in some of the books. Even some of the famous books have errors in them.
Interesting.
You know? They need to be corrected. In fact, the class I was teaching just earlier, the book had one such error in it, where the author gave a ruling, which was in the Shafi'i school. In his time, this man lived almost 1,000 years ago. In his time, it was an accepted ruling in the madhab. But the scholars of the madhab who came later overturned it because the evidence that it was based on was actually, in this case, it was based off medical evidence, not Sharia evidence.
Interesting.
It wasn't based on Quran and Sunnah. It was based on medicine. And the Sharia rulings need to be based on Sharia evidence, not medical evidence. So they removed the ruling. They say that ruling,
No longer.
it carries no weight.
Yeah, no weight.
It carries no weight. Now, if a person were just reading that book without a teacher, they would have read it and thought that's the strong Shafi'i saying. And in reality, the madhab rejects the saying.
Interesting. So would you say, because it's actually kind of ironic that most likely this will be posted to YouTube, right, inshallah, other sources, right, just for people to gain some direction or some information that they can find useful. You know, we live in an age where people are on their phone 24/7. Not saying it's a bad thing or not saying it's a good thing. It's just where we are as a society. And inshallah, this information will be able to reach people who are, you know, maybe scrolling and they find use out of it. Is there any practical way of going about using our devices? Let's say, you know, there's people who live very far away in very remote parts of the world, right? And may not have someone that they can sit with, or they may have just discovered Islam, you know, come across a YouTube video and they were very, very much inspired. Is there a practical way of going about using these devices that you feel to speak of?
I hear you asking, is there a practical way? But what I hear in my ears is there a lazy man's way? This is what I feel like you're actually asking. Yeah. Because
I wouldn't say a lazy man's way. I'm just saying that, you know, is there anything, you know, available for people online that want to just learn anything, right? Or should we avoid that at all costs and then find that teacher for everything?
The proper Islamic method is to go to a teacher. You find a teacher in your town who can teach you, and you learn from that teacher until you've either learned everything you need to learn or as much as he could teach.
Okay.
And then you go to a different teacher. If there are no more teachers in your town, what do? You travel. You think people are in remote places today? In a world where we have cell phones and satellites and airplanes and trains and all of this stuff, no one is truly remote anymore.
Yeah.
Now, back in the time of Imam al-Bukhari, he was born in a remote place. Bukhara is in what's now Uzbekistan. He traveled for knowledge. He didn't say, I'll just do what's easy.
Right.
He wanted the knowledge, and he traveled to get it. He traveled all around, going to all the major centers of Islamic learning, traveling thousands of miles. Yeah, not with a train, not with an airplane. He walked.
Yeah.
You know, he may have had an animal with him to carry his belongings, you know, but it was mostly on foot. Perhaps he had enough animals where he could ride one and still have one carrying his stuff. But travel was hard back then. Okay? It was very hard. But they did not say, let me find an excuse not to travel.
Yeah.
You know? So today, when travel is easy, why are we looking for an excuse to just go to the internet out of convenience, but it's easy for us.
I think the reason why people do that is, for one, they're not familiar with the hadith, which you mentioned, and they, some people nowadays, right? They learn you go to school online, right? It's become a habit for learning, right? A good, bad, or indifferent. It's become a habit for learning. So if that person, they want to take that next step, right? They want to say, hey, let me get up. Shaykh Yahya said, don't be lazy, right? And take that step toward finding a teacher. What are some of the characteristics that you think they should look for in that? Should it be a characteristic? How should they go about finding that teacher, would you say?
I would say beggars can't be choosers. Okay, so here in the United States, qualified teachers, alhamdulillah, like I said, most large cities have qualified teachers at this point, but it's not like they're a dime a dozen.
Okay.
So if you found someone in your town who's knowledgeable and trustworthy, learn from him.
Right.
And don't even worry about things like manners,
Okay.
Not to say that manners aren't important, because they are.
Yeah.
But it's better to learn from a trustworthy person who's ill-mannered than to learn from an ignorant person who's well-mannered.
Right.
So let the knowledge be your guide first and foremost.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, most of us don't really know what good manners are. We grow up in a Kafir society. We're steeped in Kafir traditions, which is part of the reason why we're going to the internet in the first place, because that's how Kafir society works. And that's what we grow up around. That's what we're used to. And part of it is, a lot of us are used to Kafir norms of behavior. I've seen people look at a sheikh or a teacher who's following the sunnah to a T and say that person got bad manners because what he did is different than what the Americans consider to be good manners.
Interesting.
For example, say he corrects somebody. He's ordering what's right and forbidding what's wrong, which is a religious obligation. But the American felt, attacked. Right. And so now he's ready to say, oh, he has bad manners. He's not nice to people. He's not smiling enough, or he's not friendly enough. Or he didn't make me feel welcome enough. He's ill-mannered. Yeah. Well, what he was doing is his religious obligation. Obviously we're not going to try to hurt someone's feelings, but if your feelings get hurt, you need to ask yourself, why are my feelings hurt?
Right.
Is it ego? Is it arrogance? Is it ignorance? Or is it shame? It could be any number of reasons. Right. But in the end, regardless of the reason, if you want to be safe on the day of judgment, what you need to do is take the advice. And be grateful for it. This person just saved me from however many mistakes I would have made if that advice hadn't been given to me. You should be making dua for him. Even though it hurt your feelings momentarily, you realize it was for the better.
Yeah. We do live in a society of just extreme political correctness, and then not want to hurt anybody's feelings. And I think oftentimes we cover the truth because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. And that's why I think discussions like this, just putting it out there is important so people know what they need to do. Hey, it may be easier to go this path, but is it better for you? Is it going to serve you on the day of judgment? And that's a question I think that we should all ask us. I think that's a great point. I know we had a brief moment before we started recording, and I think somehow the conversation of intentions came up, right? And how people misconstrue that. Okay, well, Allah knows my intention, or a very common one, right? When you see someone doing something blatantly wrong, right? You hear people say all the time, well, Allah knows what's in my heart, as if that's a cover for whatever they're doing. So, if you could expound upon that for people listening, I think that'd be helpful.
I'm going to put this as straight as I can, and I'm sorry, people out there, if this is triggering, but that's a sickness of the heart. For a person to do something wrong and then refuse to correct himself and give the excuse, Allah knows my intention, or Allah knows my heart. Where did that even come from? Where did that even come from? I'm not aware of a single example anywhere in the hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw someone do something incorrectly and then he said, don't worry about it. Allah knows your intention. No. You have examples to the contrary. You have examples where one time one of the Sahaba, he made wudu and he missed a spot on his ankle. There was a part of his, not his ankle, his heel. He missed a spot on his heel that he didn't wash. Our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, وَيْلٌ لِلْعَقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ. He said, the heels are going to be tortured in hell. He said, أَسْبِغُ الْوُضُوء. He said, do your wudu properly. He didn't say, Allah knows your intention. It's okay if you missed a spot, No. He said, if you don't make that, the meaning of what he said is, if you don't make your wudu correctly, then you're not going to have purification, which means your salat is going to be invalid, which then opens you to what? To torture and hellfire. He did not say, Allah knows your intention. I'll give you another example from another hadith. This one's in Bukhari, Muslim, and several other books of hadith as well. In fact, it's famous. The scholars call it Hadithul Musi'i Solatahu, the hadith of the person who was praying incorrectly. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ saw a man praying 2 rak'ahs. And when he was finished, the Prophet ﷺ said, go back and make salat, for surely you did not make salat. So the man went back and he made salat again. And when he was done, the Prophet said to him again, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said to him again, go back and make salat, for surely you did not make salat. 3 times this person went back and made salat, thinking he made salat, and the Prophet ﷺ said, go back and pray again, for surely you did not make salat. And in the end, the man said, O Messenger of Allah, this is the best I know how to do. And so our Prophet ﷺ taught him how you can perform a salat that's going to be valid. He never said, Allah knows your intention. You don't find that in the hadith, to my knowledge. I'm not aware of any hadith where something like that happened. And the hadith that some people will point to, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, it's not even about people doing something incorrectly. That hadith is about hijrah, the migration, going from Mecca to Medina. There wasn't a particular way that you had to do it. You could go walking, you could go on an animal, you could go in a group, you could go by yourself. There was no prescribed way to make migration. You just had to get there. The hadith is about your intention. What was your reason for going there? If you were doing it out of obedience to Allah and His Messenger, then when will you get your reward? On the Day of Judgment. But if you did it for some dunya reason, like for business, did it to find a woman to marry, well then your reward is going to be where? In the dunya. You'll get to do your business. You'll get to see that woman. But on the Day of Judgment, you'll have nothing. So the purpose of that hadith is that the reward you get for a deed which is properly done depends on what your intention was. It does not mean that a deed that was improperly done will somehow turn into a proper deed just because your intention was good. You don't find examples of that in the hadith.
Is it really your obligation if you see someone doing something that you know is wrong to speak up? Or can you remain silent?
So, the well-known hadith that I think all of us know is, if you see someone doing something haram, change it with your hand. If you're not able, then with your tongue. If you're not able, then with your heart. What that means is, if you see someone doing something that's wrong and you know it's wrong. So this is a key point here. We do not command what's right and forbid what's wrong unless what the person is doing is either wrong by ijma', meaning the unanimous opinion of all the top-level scholars is that it's wrong, or if you know which madhab that person is following and it's wrong in his madhab. In these cases, you go and you correct him. Otherwise, if what he's doing is within a legitimate difference of opinion, then you have no right to correct him. Okay, so that's kind of step number one. Step number two, let's say you do know that this is a case where you're supposed to correct the person. Well, then yes, you need to do something. If you're able to stop him, you stop him. If you're not able, you say something. If you're not able to even do that, then in that case, you don't say anything. But in your heart, you hate the fact that Allah is being disobeyed. Okay, that's what it means, changing it with your heart. It means at the very least, you in and of yourself, you do not accept for the person to be doing something haram.
Yeah. Okay. But that doesn't that just applies to Muslims. If somebody's not Muslim, you don't apply a Muslim ruling to someone that's not Muslim. I mean, can you, or do you, or is it applied? Something I've heard, and you can correct me, right, as someone of knowledge, is that, the greatest sin a person that's not Muslim could commit is disbelieving in Allah anyway. So until they believe in Allah, really, all the other stuff is not even, doesn't weigh as much as the thing that they've done, right? So should you still tell people, how people say, hey, well, you shouldn't eat pork, right? This is a common thing. You might be around your non-Muslim family, say, hey, you shouldn't eat pork, right? Mm-hmm. Is it really worth that conversation? Does it count as something that you should change, that you see wrong, or does it just apply to Muslims?
So whenever Allah is being disobeyed, you should hate it.
Okay.
So even if that person is a kafir, if they're doing something haram, in your heart, you should hate the fact that Allah is being disobeyed.
Right.
You should hate what they're doing. But as for what you actually say to the person, what we say to kafirs is we invite them to become Muslim. Mm-hmm. We don't need to say anything other than what we think is going to help them to accept Islam.
Right.
So we don't need, I wouldn't spend time correcting the wrong things that they do. Let them become Muslim first. Inshallah, if they've never been Muslim before in their life, then when they accept Islam, all of the wrong things they've done before that are all going to be forgiven.
Yeah.
So it's water under the bridge. Once they take Shahada, then you say to them, oh yeah, by the way, don't do that anymore.
Yeah, that thing you used to do, you got to cut that out.
Yeah, those days are over now, bro.
Yeah.
One real quick before you say something else, and there's another thing that relates to this. It's better to be a sinful Muslim than it is to be a kafir. So if you know someone who is a kafir and they're interested in Islam, and they maybe even want to be a Muslim, but there's some sin that they don't want to give up, in that case, it's better for them to say the Shahada and continue to do that sin than it is for them to continue to be a kafir. Okay? This is an important distinction. Some people, they will refuse to become Muslim because of like one thing that they don't want to give up. And that's just the worst kind of reasoning.
And why is that? Why is it better for them to become Muslim rather than not become Muslim because they struggle with that thing? And that's something I hear a lot, right? Mm-hmm. People say, once I get my life, I know Islam is the right way, but once I get my life together, then, I'm going to become Muslim. And like, as if they have to be perfect to be Muslim. You don't have to be perfect to be Muslim, right? Mm-hmm. So, but, for that reason you gave, for that example you gave, why is it better to just,
because the one sin that Allah does not forgive on the Day of Judgment is kufr. Like being a kafir is the one sin that Allah does not forgive. It means that if you're a kafir, you go to hell and you're never coming out. As it says in the Quran, khalidina fiha abada. It means staying in it forever without an end. Okay? This is the fate of the kafir. Whereas the believer, even if he's an enormous sinner, what did our Prophet ﷺ say about the sinful Muslims? In hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari, he said, يَخْرُجُ مِنَ النَّارِ مَنْ قَالَ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَفِي قَلْبِهِ وَزْنُ ذَرَّةٍ مِنْ إِيمَانٍ. He said, the one who said La ilaha illallah, what he means by that is they became Muslim. They also said Muhammadur Rasulullah. Okay. But the one who became a Muslim, he will exit out of the hellfire as long as he met the minimum qualification of Iman. Okay, so this hadith, it clarifies that as long as you're a believer, as long as you're a Muslim, even if you're so sinful that you actually got put in hell because of your sins, you're going to come out. Yeah. Because you had that minimum level of Iman, the minimum qualifications to count as a believer, you're eventually going to come out. But the kafir is never going to come out. So it's better to be a believer who's sinful, even if it does lead to you going to hell. It means you're going to come out and then go to paradise and have everlasting delight after that. Yeah. Whereas the person who stays a kafir, if he dies as a kafir, that's it. He's never going to experience a moment's peace after that.
Right, you know? Right. And forever is a long time, right? Forever is a long time. So, you know, if you're listening to this and you're on the fence and, you know, what are you waiting for? At this point, you know, take a shahada. You don't have anything to lose and you have everything to gain, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Everything to gain. That's amazing, mashallah. So I think we took a short break, but you were talking about some really important things about madhabs.
Yes. So the way it works is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in a couple of different surahs in the Quran, He says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. It means ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. This is a command. So we're commanded by Allah that if there's something we don't know in the deen, that what are we supposed to do? Ask the people of knowledge. We don't go read books. We don't go to websites. We don't go watch videos. We don't make our best guess. What do? We ask the people of knowledge. And this ayah clearly splits the ummah into two categories. You have those who are people of knowledge. They're the ones who answer questions. And you have those who are not people of knowledge. Those are the ones who ask the questions. Okay? So we need to be honest with ourselves about which category we're in. Because there's danger to not understanding which category you're in. And I'll give you an example. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith that the mujtahid, he said, إِذَا اجْتَهِدُ الْحَاكِمُ وَأَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْرَانِ وَإِذَا اجْتَهِدَ فَأَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ. He says the mujtahid scholar, that top level scholar we're talking about, the people of knowledge, okay? If he exerts his effort to try to reach a legal ruling and his legal ruling is correct, he gets a double reward. But if his legal ruling is incorrect, he still gets a reward. Okay? So we understand from this that if you're in that group of the people of knowledge, it isn't really an issue whether you're correct or not correct. What matters is, did you sincerely try to be correct? Okay? It's their obligation to answer people's questions with their expansive knowledge. Okay? So correct or incorrect is not really the issue for them. As for the rest of us, okay, and I can say confidently that everyone in the United States is in the other category, okay, of people who need to ask the people of knowledge. For the rest of us, we just ask. If a person is a person of knowledge, we ask and do what they say. It's really that simple. And we don't need to concern ourselves, well, maybe he made a mistake. Doesn't matter if he made a mistake. Allah didn't command you to find out the truth and follow it. He commanded you to ask people of knowledge. That's what you did. You obeyed the command. On the day of judgment, you're innocent. Okay? And as for the scholar, on the day of judgment, he's innocent. Whether he was correct or incorrect, he was still obedient to Allah and rewarded for his obedience. Okay? This is the case of what? A person of knowledge.
Yes.
It's also mentioned in the hadith, a hadith narrated by Abu Dawood, that there was a man who was traveling and he was injured. His head split open. And while he was sleeping at night, he woke up in a situation where he needed to make ghusl. And he was afraid that if he makes ghusl and water gets in the cut that's in his head, that he would die. So he asked the people he was traveling with whether it was permissible for him to make tayammum instead of doing a normal ghusl. They told him that there's no way for him to make tayammum. So he made his regular ghusl, and the water got into the split in his head, and he died. When his traveling companions got back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they asked the Prophet about it. And what did the Prophet say, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He said, "Qataluhu." He said, they killed him. Qatalahumullah. Then he made dua against them. Okay? This is the result if someone is not one of the people of knowledge, but they gave a religious ruling and they were wrong. They are going to bear the punishment of their error on the day of judgment. They're not going to be the people who still get a single reward because they were not in that right category. You understand?
Yep.
Okay, so you need to be one of the people of knowledge.
Yeah.
Or you need to ask one of the people of knowledge. Okay? And nowadays, like I said before, the people of knowledge are very few and far between. Okay? I don't know any mujtahid scholar for me to ask a question to right now. So what do? I find out the answers that were given by the mujtahid scholars in the past. Most of the questions I have been asked in the past, and the answers are known, and they're passed down. That's what the madhabs are. It's people passing down the rulings of the top scholars of the past.
Right.
And I remind you that these top scholars all lived within the first 300 years. They're all from the Salaf. Abu Hanifa met some of the companions.
Wow.
Okay, that's how early he lived. He met companions, like saw them with his eyes. Imam Malik, also his life overlapped with some of the companions. I don't know if it's confirmed that he actually met one, but there were companions alive when Imam Malik was a child. That's how early he lived. Imam Shafi'i and Imam Ahmed also, they all lived in the time of the Salaf. And it was the people of the Salaf who recorded their madhabs, wrote them down so that they can be passed on. So if we know that our Prophet ﷺ praised the people of the Salaf, said that those were the best centuries, and the Muslims of those centuries established the madhabs and passed them on, why would we abandon that?
Exactly. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And I think some people, they may come from a background where, some people come from Christianity, there's a lot of sects. So they look at it and say, okay, this madhab is just a sect. And, I'm just going to follow Quran and I'm just going to follow Sunnah. But in reality, what you're saying is that whether it's Quran, whether it's Sunnah, if you're not sure if it's authentic, how can you truly follow? We know the Quran is authentic, right? But in terms of some of the hadith that complement the Quran, even, you can't figure out how to make salat in the Quran. It comes from hadith, right? If you're not validating your sources, then who knows what you're really doing at the end of the day? And the best way to validate these sources is by following a school of thought. And of the schools of thought that have existed at those times, the ones that survived are the four schools of thought.
The four that are still continuing today. That's true.
Yeah.
But I would put it a little bit more bluntly.
Okay.
We need to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
We can't be fooling ourselves. Most of the people I've met in my life who say they follow Quran and Sunnah, if I recited to them a random ayah chosen from the Quran somewhere and asked them to explain the meaning of it, they wouldn't be able to. I mean, I actually recite it, like the Arabic. Yeah. They wouldn't know what I said because they don't understand Arabic. They wouldn't know which surah it came from. They might not even know if it's an ayah. Like, they wouldn't know if what I said was an ayah or if I recited some Arabic poetry or if I read from some Arabic storybook. Like, they just hear a bunch of sounds that they don't know. Okay? If that person is being honest with himself, he has to admit he doesn't actually know what the Quran says.
Right.
So how can he claim to be following the Quran and Sunnah when he doesn't understand the Quran? Instead, what is he doing? He's picking up a book that has English on half of the page. He's reading the English, which is written by a human. It's written by Abdullah Yusuf Ali or Muhammad Muhsin Khan or Muhammad Pickthall or someone like that. And he's taking the words of that person as if it's the words of Allah. Even though Allah says in the Quran that the Quran is Arabic. Inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyyan la'allakum ta'qilun. Right? Allah specifies that the Quran is Arabic. Yet they read in the English talking about they following the Quran. They haven't realized the English is not the Quran. And then they want to say they follow hadith, and most of these people cannot even name the books of hadith. Some of them probably can't even name the 6 very famous books of hadith. But those 6 are not the only books of hadith. So how can you be following the Sunnah when you haven't even, you haven't memorized the Sunnah? You haven't even read it through once, much less memorized it. And most of them can't even name the books. So how do they know if what they're doing is How do they know if it's contradicting some hadith that they've never encountered? They don't know. So why are you acting like you're following the sunnah when you don't know what the sunnah is? It's just talk. It's empty talk. And you compare that with somebody like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who memorized 1 million hadith. Did he know the sunnah? Yes. Okay? Yes. You know, Imam Ahmad, mashallah, he was asked, how many hadith do you have to memorize in order to reach like that level of being a top level scholar? This is just one of the many qualifications, by the way. The person asked him, he said, is it 100,000 hadith? And Imam Ahmad said, no. Guy said, is it 200,000 hadith? He said, no. He said, is it 300,000 hadith? He said, no. He said, is it 400,000 hadith? And he gestured with his hand, maybe somewhere around there. You know, we got people walking around here, they haven't memorized even one hadith. Yet they want to act like they're a top level scholar. They want to act like they're one of the people of knowledge and they should be answering people's questions. It's insanity. I don't know any other way to put it other than insanity. And then some people might look at me and they say, oh, you're a hypocrite. I see you answering questions all the time. I say, man, the answers I'm giving are not my opinion. When I answer a question, all I'm doing is passing on what the scholars of the madhab said, the people who were at that level. I'm just a conduit. I have no opinion on these matters of my own. Yep. You know? And I think we're never going to really advance as a community until we acquire the humility to just say my own personal opinion doesn't amount to a hill of beans. You know, it's worthless. Why not listen to those who actually knew the Quran, who actually knew the Sunnah, who memorized hadith, who knew all of the other qualifications? Because just memorizing is not enough. You know, there's ayahs in the Quran that are abrogated. Even if you memorize the Quran, you might start acting on an ayah that you ain't supposed to be acting on. You know, there's a lot more to this. You know, our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said the ummah will never reach unanimous opinion and be misguided. Okay, so that means when the top level scholars, the mujtahids, all agree on something, they're guaranteed to be right. Which means that once that agreement is confirmed, it's not permissible to ever go against it. Because we now know what the correct answer is. And remember, the people of knowledge, what is their job? Is it their job to always be correct? No. But it is their job to always sincerely try to be correct. And in cases where there's unanimous opinion, the correct answer is known. So to go against it could only be insincerity. You know what I mean?
Right.
So a person might see something in the Quran and misunderstand it. You know, but if he sees that there's unanimous opinion on the meaning, so he needs to say, oh, that is the right understanding because it's ijma, it's unanimous opinion. He needs to give up his own opinion. Mm-hmm. You know, but you wouldn't know which matters are unanimously agreed upon until you've studied, because that is not in the Quran and it's not in the hadith. That's in the history of Islamic scholarship, where you need to go back and look at the hundreds of madhabs that have existed in the past and see what there's unanimous agreement on. You know, like just reading Quran and just reading hadith is not enough.
Yeah, it sounds like for a fact it goes deep, right? And most of us don't have the stamina or the energy or the time or the focus or the desire to try to pursue that, right? You know, so and that information has been lost from some of us only through the chains that you can get information through, right? Mm-hmm. And so you said something earlier, which is, you know, if the muhaddith, am I saying this correctly, right?
Muhaddith or mujtahid?
Mutashid. The muhaddith is the one who memorizes hadith, right? The mutashid, if they give a ruling and they're right, 2 rewards. If they're wrong, 1 reward, mm-hmm. right? But if you're a person that's asking for information, mm-hmm. you know, you just follow it because, you know, that's what you're supposed to do. But if you're not a person that's asking, right, and you're following somebody who's not of knowledge, then you're going to be misguided. So it really sounds like it's really in your best interest to follow one of the schools of thought that are validated, right? Or that the information is still available to you, right? For your own best interest. Because even if there's something that is not perfect, right? It's still you're going to land on the right side on the day of judgment, sounds like, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
You don't have a choice. We're commanded to ask the people of knowledge. So you're either going to obey Allah or you're going to be arrogant and not do it.
Arrogant and not do it. Yep.
Those are the options. You know?
Yeah, it sounds like I think that a lot of people are in that ladder that they may reject it, but Allah knows best. Inshallah, they be guided.
I'll give people the benefit of the doubt and say maybe it's not arrogance. Maybe they just don't understand that is the choice that they have. Some people maybe they don't follow a madhab. Maybe it's not out of arrogance.
Yeah.
Maybe they really think that Islam works the way Christianity works. We grow up in a country that's largely Christian, dominated by Christian traditions, and a lot of us pick up on that. Yeah. Christians, when they study, what do? They grab the Bible, they read it themselves, and they consider themselves to be authorities because in the Christian belief, the Christians believe there's a Holy Spirit that's inside of you that will guide you to the right understanding. So they think they have something infallible within them that will guarantee that they're understanding it correctly. Okay? As Muslims, do we believe that? No, that's not what we believe. Okay? We believe that the one who's infallible is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And truth is to be gained by knowing what he said. So first you got to learn the texts, the Quran and the Hadith. And I'm not talking about just Bukhari and Muslim either. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of Hadith. Okay? First you got to learn that. But then you got to go through the work of making sense out of all of it. Because you're going to find, once you learn that many hadith, you're going to find that sometimes on a single subject, you got hadith saying one thing and other hadith saying the opposite. How do you make sense of it? Which one is the one that you should follow? It takes a lot of work, a lot of tedious work to make sense out of this stuff. And it's something not all of us are able to do. Even if we did have all of that stuff memorized, a lot of us don't even have the brain power to juggle so many things simultaneously and be able to synthesize it according to very particular rules. It's not something that just anyone can do. And that's kind of, earlier you were saying a lot of people, they don't have the time or the energy to do all of that stuff. And that's the beauty of it.
You don't have to.
Yeah, you don't have to. Allah did not demand that all of us go through all of that.
Yep.
Rather, a small minority of us dedicate their entire lives to knowledge. They hit that level. They explain what needs to be explained. And the rest of us, all we have to do is ask.
It's like you're not going to go to medical school so you can figure out how to remove your appendix. You just go to somebody who's gone to medical school, went through the training, so that you can get better, right? And as Muslims, not all of us are required for that level of scholarship to practice. We can ask a scholar, right? Which brings me, to the plug that we have. If you go to www.muhb.org and you sign up and you put in your email address and you become a part of our newsletter, we have a way for you to link in and for you to ask a scholar, such as the one we're sitting across from right now. And, not every question that I ask you, you're going to answer because, I heard you say this in the class. It was so funny. I kind of walked in and you said that you asked the group a question and you were like, I don't know, if I didn't teach you this question, then you really shouldn't give an answer, right? Which is great practice for basically, if you don't know, don't make up something, right? But sometimes you come across things that raise questions just so you can be guided to ask someone. And maybe that might open the door to other things you didn't know that you thought you knew, right? And you were going about your life in a way that you thought was okay, right? And you correct it. I feel like Allah has so much mercy on us that he finds ways to guide us, but then what do, right? For one reason or another, we may, something in our hearts, it's just something in our, in our desires may take us away from that. But when you come across someone of knowledge, ask a scholar, don't go about it on your own. and continue to pursue people of knowledge so that you can be rightly guided. I think that's what I'm getting from this.
That's the path.
Yeah.
That's how it's been laid out from the beginning. And it's not hard. It's not a difficult path to walk.
Right.
It requires a degree of humility, a degree of sincerity, but whatever difficulty we face, it's not going to be in following a madhab. It's going to be in the various trials and tribulations that life throws at us.
Right.
It's going to be in struggling against our own inclinations, which are not always wholesome.
Yeah.
Like that's where the struggle is going to be. Following the madhab is the easy part, bro.
Yeah.
That's the easy part.
Yeah. And sometimes you might, I'm actually curious about this. So let me ask you about this, right? So you follow a madhab, right? Does that mean that you don't use things from other madhabs, or like every ruling that you take should come from a person from that madhab, and you shouldn't take rulings from people? So you know what I'm saying? Like, let's say a ruling comes from your teacher, right, or from this madhab, but he may get to a point where he doesn't have an answer, I guess. And another madhab may have an answer to a question that he or she doesn't have, right? Are you allowed to take things from other madhabs, or do you just follow only one? And if, how do you go about doing that?
So I'm going to answer with the way it was explained to me.
Okay.
The scholars, they have a saying, "Al-amiyu la madhaba lahu." It means the layperson doesn't have a madhab. Okay? And what they mean by that is the layperson just asks a question to someone who can give an answer. So the layperson, if he's in a situation, he might go to the sheikh of his local masjid, ask the question, get the answer, and follow it.
Yeah.
And next time he has a question, he may end up asking it to a different sheikh, and he might get an answer from a completely different madhab, and he wouldn't even know that it's from a different madhab. He just asks and does as he's told, and he's in compliance with the religion. The layperson doesn't know which madhab he's following, if he's even consistently following one. He just asks and acts on it. So yes, you can take from multiple madhabs. But eventually, if you study, you'll get to a point where, once you study, like when you sit down and actually start studying, you're going to study one madhab at a time. So you're going to learn one, and when you get to a certain level in that madhab where you know what the rulings are and you know the dalils, the evidence that support those rulings, at that point, it's really not appropriate for you to follow the opinion of some other madhab where you don't know what their dalil is. You don't know what they based it on. Basically, it's like the layperson is blind following. He's just asking and doing what he's told. But there's a point where you have enough knowledge where you're not blind following madhab A. But if you followed madhab B, you would be blind following. So you're like downgrading yourself.
Okay.
At that level, you should really just keep following the madhab you know. But also, once you're at that level, it's typically safe for you to start studying a second madhab. So then you'll start, once you get to the point where you know the evidence behind that madhab is kind of your choice again.
I think that's beautiful, actually.
A person shouldn't really describe himself as being Shafi'i, for example, unless he knows the dalils behind the Shafi'i rulings. It's only at that point that he's truly Shafi'i. Up until that point, he's a layperson who officially doesn't have a madhab, but most lay people, well, I don't know if I can say most, but a large, like the normal layperson, does know which madhab he's following, even if he doesn't know the evidence behind it. He knows which madhab he got his obligatory knowledge from. He may identify as Shafi'i or Maliki or whatever, and that's fine. But in this case, it's not like the old-fashioned sense of him knowing the dalils. It's just him identifying the source of his knowledge. And that's important. It's important for anyone who's learning Islamic knowledge to know what route it came from, because that's how you avoid confusion. Especially if you're young in the deen or haven't studied much, you'll get confused easily if you're hearing some things from this route, like say the Shafi'is, but you don't know that person is telling you Shafi'i stuff. Then you hear some other stuff from another route, and he's telling you Hanafi stuff. And now you're getting confused because you're like, wait, I thought it was like this. And then you're like, oh, wait, I thought it was, and you get befuddled. And that whole consternation would have been completely avoided if you simply knew, oh, that person was saying Shafi'i stuff, so let me put that in one part of my mind. This person's saying Hanafi stuff, let me put that in another part of my mind. And let me not try to justify them with each other. Because the confusion comes in trying to merge them together, two things that should not be merged together.
Yeah. I can see that. And I think some of the struggle, right, that at least in the past what I've heard, right, is that I think people had a sense that it's like you're committing to a one madhab for life. It's like this is what I have to do for life. But if you're a lay person, there's nothing wrong with interacting with scholars that may convey information from a madhab, and you may be at another masjid and you see a scholar, you can ask that person, or wherever they are, ask that person, and they're from a different madhab, right? You can, if you're a lay person, you just want to practice Islam to the best of your ability, ask a scholar, whether it's from this madhab or that madhab. It's not a sin against you, so to speak, right?
Correct, but still my advice is ask what madhab it's coming from.
Okay.
Just so that you can keep it straight in your own head and not start mixing and matching things that shouldn't be mixed and matched. Mm-hmm. Because there is a danger that comes in mixing madhabs. Mm-hmm. And for most of Islamic history, this wasn't really an issue. Like the way history played out, like if you lived in West Africa, everybody was Maliki. You weren't going to ask one sheikh. Like if you asked two different sheikhs, you weren't going to get answers from two different madhabs. It was going to be consistent. Right. If you lived in like East Africa or like the Arab countries or way out in like Indonesia, like you were going to get Shafi'i answers. If you lived in like Iraq or if you lived among the Turks or something, you were going to get Hanafi answers. So it's like most parts of the world were kind of like one madhab places. There were only a few big cities, Baghdad, Damascus, Mecca, Medina, Cairo, a few big cities where you had all the madhabs present or multiple madhabs present. Most Muslims could ask anyone, and there was no risk of mixing madhabs up. Here in the U.S., there's a big risk because all the madhabs are here, And it is possible for someone to perform an action that all four madhabs consider invalid because that person mixed madhabs within a single action. I give you an example. In the Shafi'i madhab, the minimum, I'm not talking about the best wudu, I'm saying the minimum for your wudu to be valid is that when you wipe your head, you have to wipe some part of your head. It doesn't matter how small of a part it is. Okay, you could wipe just like one hair on the top of your head. That would be enough for your wudu to be valid, according to the Shafi'is. Also, according to the Shafi'is, if an adult man touches an adult woman skin to skin, both of their wudus are broken. It doesn't matter, if it was some kind of lustful touch. It doesn't matter if it was an accident. If the skin touched, the wudu is broken. That's how the Shafi'i school is. The Maliki school, on the other hand, according to the strongest opinion, when you wipe your head, you must wipe the entire head. Okay? But in the Maliki school, if you touch a woman skin to skin, like by accident, there was no lustfulness in it or anything like that, the wudu would not be broken. Two different madhabs, two different rulings. So imagine if somebody, when he's making wudu, he decides to only wipe like a couple hairs on his head because he knows in the Shafi'i school it's valid to do that. And then let's say when he's at the supermarket and the cashier is giving him his change, her finger touched his finger by mistake. Well, according to the Shafi'i school, he does not have wudu anymore. And according to the Maliki school, he never had wudu to begin with because he didn't wipe enough of his head to start. But this person might walk away thinking, oh, well, I made wudu by Shafi'i school. It was valid. And then when the lady touched his hand, he might say, well, according to Maliki school, my wudu is not broken. And then he might go and make salat. But in reality, both of the madhabs agree that he does not have purification. Mm-hmm. So this is the danger that can come from mixing madhabs. You're definitely safer learning one madhab, following one madhab, and then once you've learned it well, then learning a second madhab. There's no rule that says you have to follow one madhab, but it's kind of like the more wise decision is to just stick with one madhab and don't go out of your madhab unless you have a real need to do so.
It's not like a gang or fraternity and you're in it for life and you can't interact
No,
with
it's not like that at all. You know, like I said, the commandment from Allah was just ask a person of knowledge.
Yeah.
It could be any person of knowledge. You don't have to follow one madhab. And in fact, I know a lot of people who follow one madhab on certain matters, like purification and salat, for example. They might follow the Maliki madhab because it's regarded by many to be easier on matters of purification and salat. But then for something like zakat, they might follow the Shafi'i school because the Shafi'i school is considered easier on zakat. You know, and you know they might go kind of pick and choose whatever is easy, and that's fine as long as you're picking and choosing completely different things. Don't pick one particular act and take half of that act from this madhab and half of the other half from a different madhab. That's when you're gonna, you know, ruin yourself.
That's beautiful. I mean, the way you've explained it, it's almost as if it makes your life easier.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the scholars, they say the differences of opinion among the scholars are a mercy. And it's a mercy. Why? Because it gives us choice.
Right.
You know, on any given action, there might be as many as 4 different opinions. So whichever one is easiest for you, you can follow it. You have that flexibility.
Yeah.
You know. Now, of course, some scholars would tell you, for the sake of disciplining your heart, that you should not always seek out the easiest opinion. And I think that's good advice. But some of us are weak, and some of us are in tough situations. So if there is an easy opinion that works in your situation, it's a legitimate opinion, go for it.
You see why this is why you ask a scholar now, right? Because he can make your life a lot easier. And I think sometimes people are even living based off of, a lot of people, right? Living all based off of, well, my dad said this, you know, my mom said that, right? But did your mom give you the dalil? Did your mom give you the chain? Or is there some culture mixed in to some of the things that you're doing? You know, is there some possible shirk mixed in to some of the things that you're doing? You know, I know there's a lot of that, right? And so, you know, people have this concept of pure Islam, you know, just Quran and just Sunnah. But if you really want to keep your Islam pure, you got to know how to understand what it is that the information you're being presented, and you got to make sure it's authentic.
Yeah, so verify. It's not that hard.
Yeah,
I mean,
trust but verify.
I think most people, their father or their mother gives them the basics about Islam. And it's not that the father or mother are bad Muslims.
Yeah.
But what happens is sometimes the father or mother leaves something out.
Yeah.
Like what he said, everything he said may have been correct to the child, but there's, you know, 1 or 2 things that he failed to say. And because the child missed out on those couple of things, he now makes errors. This is why it's better to go to like someone who has training, who can then teach you and make sure, like teach you in a systematic way, and make sure that you don't have gaps. And then, of course, the other risk is sometimes your father or mother are one of those people who heard some things from this source and heard some things from this source, and it got jumbled together. So what they might be giving you is a hodgepodge, you know, a hodgepodge that may not be reliable. So in all cases, going to like a trained teacher is going to clarify all of that stuff. It'll clear it right up.
Okay.
Again, I'm not saying this to disparage anyone's parents. I'm just saying, you know, if your parent didn't himself or herself go study in like a formal madrasa education, then, you know, just verify.
Yep.
You know, in the past, sometimes like parents would teach books. You know, they wouldn't just say, oh, make salat like this. They would sit down and say, this book is from such and such a madhab. It was taught to me by my father. I'm going to teach it to you. You know, and he didn't go to a madrasa and he didn't study for years, but he did get that one book. And he has a chain for it, you know. It was taught by his father, it was taught by his father, taught by his father. And somewhere a few generations back, you had someone who went to go study, you know, and it's just being passed down, but it's being passed down with a book to ensure that things don't get left out by mistake. You know, in the end, it all boils down to the chain, man. If whoever's teaching you, are they knowledgeable and trustworthy? Was their teacher knowledgeable and trustworthy? Was their teacher knowledgeable and trustworthy, etc.?
Does ijaza mean anything to you? Like, people use that word, ijaza. Like, so is that required to teach something?
So the way people are using the term ijaza nowadays is as if it means permission to teach. And I think it's a good way to set things up in our times. You know, but historically, ijaza was something that was used in lieu of teaching. So like, for example, I might go to a sheikh and sit down with him and study a book from beginning to end. He explained it all. He clarified everything. And afterwards, whether he gives me ijaza or not, I can still say, that person taught me this book because it's a fact. It's reality. I don't need his permission to tell people what happened in my life.
Okay.
You know, I can say I learned this book from him. Mm-hmm. And if he gave me his chain, then I know the whole chain of teachers that led to him as well. So without an ijaza, I know what my chain is. But then someone else might come to that same teacher. He might show up to my class at the very end, like when we're doing the last chapter of the book. He might come to my class and talk to the sheikh. And the sheikh may realize that this person actually has a lot of knowledge. Like perhaps he's even studied books of a higher level than the book I'm studying with. And the sheikh might just give him ijaza without him needing to sit down with him and read the book cover to cover. If the sheikh feels reassured that this student actually understands the book without having to read it all through, he may give that student ijaza, saying, okay, I'll give you my chain. It's as if you learned it from me. In the past, that's one of the ways that ijaza was used, one of the more common ways. It's like to establish a chain for someone who wasn't literally taught the book by you, but you can give him an ijaza. So he now has you in his chain.
Okay.
But that kind of ijaza wouldn't be given unless that student, well, I don't want to say that. In many cases, that kind of ijaza wouldn't be given unless the student showed that he understands the material. But ijaza, I mean, historically, it's been used in a lot of ways. There's a type of ijaza called an ijaza of barakah, where like a sheikh might walk in and say to all of the students in the class, I give you ijaza in everything I've learned. You know, and so these students, some of them have only been studying for 1 week, suddenly have ijaza in all of these huge books, you know, Bukhari and Muslim and Minhaj al-Talibin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They now have ijazas in all of those books, you know, but this ijaza is an ijaza given for the sake of blessings, because they're blessings that come with these chains. So now the students have these chains and inshallah they get the blessings from it. That type of ijaza is not meant to mean that, okay, you can now go and teach al-Bukhari, and the students understand that. I am a little concerned that some people nowadays, they might think, oh, I have an ijaza, that means I can go teach it. You know, and some of the people who are giving ijazas right now, they're not confirming if the students even understand. You know, they're just reading the book, and the student heard it, and then they give the student an ijaza. And that's fine, you know, but it's putting the onus on the student to be honest, you know, that, oh yes, I have an ijaza, meaning this book was read to me in my presence, I heard it, I know my chain in it now, but the student needs to be honest with himself and say, but I know I'm not qualified to teach it. You know, I've received the chain and that's it. And, you know, I mean, that's how knowledge is passed down through chains. I'm not going to criticize someone for going to a sheikh and having the book read, you know. If he's a good student, he'll take that time to make corrections in the book. You know, some of these books, they're printed wrong. You know, a lot of people don't know. Like, We who speak English and read English books, we're kind of spoiled because we have computers that can scan those books in seconds, identify any spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, and fix a whole lot of stuff. Well, in Arabic, those programs don't work so well. You know, Arabic is a very efficient language that doesn't use a whole lot of letters in a given word. If you misspell a word, like you put the letters in the wrong order, what you wrote is probably the correct spelling of some completely different word. You know, so the spell check is not going to recognize it as a spelling mistake. It's going to recognize it as a legit word, but actually it is a spelling mistake. A lot of the books contain spelling mistakes. Sometimes words are missing. Sometimes they type in, you know, the tashkil or dhammas and fathas and things that normally aren't written. Sometimes, especially books of hadith, they write them in there. And sometimes the tashkil is not correct. You know, and these are the things that you learn when you sit down with the sheikh, and the sheikh reads the book to you. You know, you look in your book and you see, is what's written here, does it match what he spoke with his mouth? And you change your book if it didn't match, so that it matches what you heard. Because the knowledge is gained from the teacher, not from the book. Understand?
Yep.
In the Arab culture, the elderly were always highly respected. So people started applying the word sheikh to anyone who's highly respected, regardless of age. So they started saying sheikh for like royalty, like if you were a king or a prince or something, they call you the sheikh. You know, and if you were very knowledgeable in Islam, or if you were known to be highly religious, then people might call you sheikh, even if you're not old.
Right,
you know?
right.
But in time, it's like all these words, we just toss them around now.
So, I guess historically, did it have a special name for people of knowledge?
So historically, the people of knowledge were either called alim, which means person of knowledge, or faqih, which means person of understanding, or mujtahid, which means one who exerts effort. All three of these terms were used. Also mufti, which meant one who gives legal opinions.
Got it.
All of these terms were used to mean someone who is a person of great knowledge, a top-level scholar. But alim and faqih and mufti are tossed around willy-nilly these days. Mujtahid is the only term left that actually means like a top-level scholar nowadays.
Yeah, you know, a lot that doesn't roll off as easy as sheikh. So
well, it doesn't roll off the tongue.
You don't hear a lot of people saying it as much, I feel like. Well,
part of it is that it's less easy to say, but part of it also is we need to have some kind of word to refer to someone like Imam Malik or Imam Shafi'i. You know? So mujtahid is the word that we've reserved for that purpose. And all the other words that they might have been called now, you know, can be applied to others. And I don't really have a problem with that, honestly, because mujtahid scholars are few and far between. You know, like a person who truly deserves the name faqih, you're probably never going to meet one in your life. I'm not aware of one anywhere on the earth right now. Like those top-level scholars, they don't come very often.
And faqih is derived from the word fiqh.
Yes. And the word fiqh, its original meaning in Arabic is understanding, to understand. Later, we started using it to mean Islamic law, but its original meaning is just to understand something.
Just to understand. And then it was adopted for law at some point, right? Yeah.
So, I mean, this is something that happens not just in Islam, in all fields of study. You have a word that was used with one meaning normally, but then when a certain field is developed, it develops a terminology of its own, and it might begin using a word in a very particular way. For example, an easy example is the word salat. Okay, before Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Arabs said the word salat, what did they mean by it? Well, the word salat originally, it means dua. So salat and dua have the same meaning linguistically.
Interesting.
You know, but after the revelation came to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we started applying the word salat to a specific act that starts with a takbir and ends with a taslim. You know, and so that became like a special terminology that's used whenever Islam is being discussed. But the truth of the matter is, the word salat still technically means dua.
Means dua. Right. But you don't say. But if you say I pray dua 5 times a day, people will really be probably confused. And it's like, are you making salat though?
Yeah, because
Okay.
dua
Yeah.
does not refer to salat.
Okay.
It only refers to dua. Okay,
Yeah.
whereas salat refers to salat and can refer to dua as well.
Right. Right.
It depends on whether you're using the word salat with its particular religious terminology or in the general linguistic way.
You know, I see the word salat written, SALAH or SALAT. Where does that come from? Like, what is the proper? You hear people pronounce it different ways. What is the proper way to really
They're both
pronounce it?
fine.
They're both fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
In Arabic, you have a letter. It's called ta marbuta.
Okay.
This letter is a T. Okay? But if it's the last word that you're going to say in the sentence, then you would pronounce it like a H.
Got you.
This is like rules of Arabic.
Okay.
So you could say solah or you could say solat. They're both correct pronunciations. But I do see how it could be confusing.
Yeah. Right. Hey, you hear people say salah, or sometimes people say salat. I'm like, is it because we're American, we just say things a little bit differently, or is it a right or wrong way? But I can understand in the context of maybe a Arabic structured sentence, where the next word may dictate how you end the word that came before it, right?
Yeah. We just think of the adhan, for example.
Right.
In the adhan, we say hayya ala salah, right? You end it with a H because it's the last sound that came in that line. But then if you look at the adhan for Fajr, what do we say in the middle of it? We say as-salatu khayrun min an-nawm.
Right.
We say as-salatu, right? So the T is clearly pronounced there because it's not the last sound in the sentence.
Understood. So, alhamdulillah, Sheikh, it was a lot of good information that we were able to go over today. I really appreciate you sitting down with us. And inshallah, we get to have you back. And maybe along the lines, someone learned something and they benefited from this. And you might have a few people coming up to you after Jumu'ah or during the week asking you some questions, since they should be asking a scholar.
Insha'Allah ta'ala. Thank you for having me, brother. It's been a pleasure. May Allah make your affairs easy, and may Allah expand your chest, insha'Allah ta'ala. And may Allah grant us success.
Ameen.
Ameen.
I did have something, though. Maybe something brief, like you could say about the importance of Masjid al-Aqsa, Philistine, just something like, you may not know what's going on, but what you do know is that it's important. And
Sure.
like
Well, we're recording, so
Yeah.
sure. Absolutely. The land of Philistine is a blessed land, and it's blessed by having the feet of so many prophets walk on it. There are a lot of prophets that live there, a lot of prophets that are buried there. And the land itself is blessed because of that. And the masjid that's there, Masjid al-Aqsa, is the second oldest masjid in the world. It was built by Adam himself, alayhi salam. And the rewards of the salats there are multiplied. So a salat in Masjid al-Aqsa is rewarded as if you did 500 salats. So it's definitely one of the great places in the world, one of the most blessed places, and we want to defend it. We want to make sure, for example, that the Jews do not come in and try to turn Masjid al-Aqsa back into one of their temples, which is something that some of them want to do. And I mean, I don't know what the solution is over there. I really don't. But the solution definitely is not the continued oppression of Muslims, Christians, and whomever else is living there in Palestine along with them. It's not the answer. And we can't maintain a so-called peace that's based upon the oppression of others. Such a peace is not going to be permanent. It's not going to last. And I don't have sympathy for people who talk a lot of talk about peace while every single day they're doing violence to others. No, I don't have sympathy for such people. May Allah help us. Ameen.
Ameen.
And may Allah help the Palestinians, and may Allah free Palestine and grant them some kind of stability in their lives and in their societies. This is a place that in the past produced scholars, produced good Muslims. And today, they got to worry about if they have enough water. They got to worry about where food and medicine are going to come from. You know, they have basic needs that have, you know, taken their attention away from the sorts of things they would have been paying attention to had it been a free country. So, but now we're veering into politics, which is something I don't like to talk about.
Yep. In just from a non-political point of view, is there anything prophesized about Palestine in the future? Or, you know, there's so much talk about it today in terms of the victory of the Muslims or anything like that.
Well,
It's
yeah,
something
I
that
mean,
that people can look towards.
well, I don't know if this is something for people to look towards, but it is mentioned that the Dajjal is going to be killed there.
Mm.
That Isa alayhi salam is going to kill the Dajjal in the land of Palestine. So there's that. But I mean,
Yeah.
I personally don't believe, some people will disagree with me, but I don't really believe that the Dajjal is going to show up in our lifetime.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of things that's supposed to happen before then.
Well, most of the things that
Yeah.
happened before the Dajjal have happened. So it is possible that he may show up while we're still alive. It's possible. But I'm also aware that Islamic scholars who lived like 900 and 1,000 years ago also thought the Dajjal was going to appear imminently.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, I think, you know, it could be now or it could be later. I'm just going to not assume it's going to happen right now. Which means you got to do what you can to get yourself right. You know, some people, I feel like part of the reason why they hope that Dajjal is coming soon and the Mahdi is coming soon and Isa alayhi salam is coming soon is because they think that if they can just, you know, become a companion to Prophet Isa alayhi salam, that somehow that will straighten them out, that they'll be good Muslims after that. You know, they're waiting for like someone else to come and fix them. And I say, don't wait for someone else to come fix you. You know, fix yourself now. Like, we know what's right. We know what's wrong. Choose what's right. Okay? It's really not that hard from a conceptual basis. It's not necessarily easy in practice to always choose what's right, but work. You know, you think you're going to get rewarded with Jannah without doing any work? No. Our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Hal min mushammirin ila al-Jannah?" He said, is there anyone who's willing to roll up his sleeves for paradise? And the Sahaba, they said, "Nahnu mushammirun ya Rasulullah." They said, we're rolling up our sleeves. Meaning they ready to work. You know, some of us, we want to just, you know, get the blessing of paradise like a lottery ticket. Like, do no work and just get the huge reward. I'm like, you know, it could happen. It happens for some people. It does. You know, but why not spend your time in a beneficial way? Why not prepare for paradise now? You know, it's the better use of time.
Alhamdulillah. Well, thank you, Shaykh, for again, well, not again, but thank you, Shaykh, for joining us, for sharing your knowledge, for providing some guidance, and inshallah, this is a benefit to the viewers and everyone that gets an opportunity to hear and watch this video.
Thank you for having me, brother. May Allah preserve you and may Allah grant you success. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.